This teaching will be a first in a series on unlocking the truth. The first lesson in this series will cover the harmful effects of adding leaven to Yahuah's perfect truth. It is important to understand what has happened to Yahuah's truth over time. It all started in the Garden of Eden. The old serpent craftily and subtly changed Yahuah's command. Genesis 3:1-4, and the Nahash was more crafty than all the lives of the field, which Yahuah Elohim had made. So Nahash here was more crafty than even man. No more intelligent, but more crafty. Craftiness is the foundation of deception. Nahash was not a snake. He had a name. Gadriel is his name, as found in the book of Enoch. He was not a demon, but an angel. Demons did not exist yet. Angel names end with El or El because they carry the name of Elohim. And Nahash means serpent. And he said to the woman, "Is it true that Elohim has said, 'Do not eat of every tree of the garden'?" And the woman said to the Nahash, "We are to eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden. But of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, Elohim said, 'Do not eat of it, nor touch it, lest you die.' And the Nahash said to the woman, 'You shall certainly not die. For Elohim knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be like Elohim, knowing good and evil.'" The old serpent changed "lest you die" to "certainly not die." That subtle change was adding leaven. Leaven is a substance that creates bubbles and gas, air bubbles, and it causes dough to expand. It completely changed the word of Elohim and ushered sin into the world. The old serpent and his messengers have continued this type of deception since the beginning. Revelations 12:9 says, "And the great dragon was thrown out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who leads all the world astray. He was thrown to the earth, and his messengers were thrown out with him." The messengers of the old serpent, the devil, and Satan, they are many. There are those in this world who have been fighting this deception since that time. Today, many are becoming enlightened to the truth. That's what this series is all about. Opening the eyes of everyone and anyone who accepts deception as truth, even if they do not understand or know that they are accepting deception as truth. I'm reminded of a story about a wise old man. There was a wise old man known throughout the land as one of the wisest people alive, and he spent his days teaching others about wisdom and truth. One day, while walking through the countryside with some of his students, they happened upon an old abandoned barn. Seeing that it hadn't been used in years, the wise man decided to use this as an opportunity to teach his students a valuable lesson about leaven. He gathered some flour from inside the barn and mixed it with water until it formed into dough. Then he took a small pinch of leaven and added it to the dough before kneading it together with his hand. As soon as he added the leaven to the dough, something amazing began to happen. The dough started expanding. The wise man's students were amazed at how powerful a little leaven could be on something like simple flour and water. The wise man then took out another bowl filled with pure flour without any leaven and explained that this is what Elohim's word should look like, pure truth, without any mixture or alteration whatsoever. He then explained that adding even a tiny bit of falsehood can have a disastrous effect. The wise old man concluded by saying, "My children, take heed. When we meddle in matters concerning Elohim's perfect word, let us not add our own ideas or beliefs, but instead remain steadfastly devoted to his perfect truth." A few months later, all those present during this lesson had taken these words deeply into their heart, so much so that they never again dared add anything extra nor subtract anything from Elohim's command, keeping them always pure for fear of completely spoiling the commands of Elohim. There are many scriptures that speak about the effects of leaven, but we'll use a few examples. So Exodus 12:15-20, it talks about the feast of unleavened bread. For 7 days, the Israelites were to eat bread made without yeast. This bread can be prepared quickly without waiting for the yeast to rise. So the Israelites can leave immediately as soon as the signal was given that they had been released from slavery in Egypt. So a few things to note. In Exodus 12:15, it says, leaven to cease from your houses. In verse 19, it says, no leaven to be found in your houses. In verse 20, in all your dwellings you are to eat unleavened bread. So not having any leaven on the premises was critical. Then in Exodus 12:34, and the people took their dough before it was leavened, having their kneading bowls bound up on their garment, on their shoulders. And then Exodus 12:39 says, and they baked unleavened bread or unleavened cakes of the dough which they had brought out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, since they were driven out of Egypt and had not been able to delay, nor had they prepared food for themselves. So this leaven, they were not to add leaven, and this was to help them to remember even at a later time. In Exodus 13:3, and Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you went out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. For by strength of hand Yahuah brought you out of this place, and whatever is leavened shall not be eaten. He said, remember this day. And leaven, or not using leaven, was part of helping them to remember the day that they were released from slavery out of Egypt. Then in Exodus 13:7, unleavened bread is to be eaten the 7 days, and whatever is leavened is not to be seen with you, and leaven is not to be seen with you within all your border. So again, whatever is leavened is not to be seen with you. They weren't even to have leaven in their presence. That's how important it was as part of their remembrance. It's not to even have leaven in their presence. But then we fast forward to the New Testament. And Matthew 16:6 says, and Yahusha said to them, mind, and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Matthew 16:11, how is it that you do not understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread, but to beware of the leaven of the Pharisee? Matthew 16:12 says, then they understood that he did not say to beware of leaven of bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Mark 8:15 says, and he was warning them, saying, mind, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the leaven of the Herods. Luke 12:1 says, meanwhile, when an innumerable crowd of people had gathered together, so that they trampled one another, he began to say to his taught ones, first, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. And then 1 Corinthians 5:8 says, so then, let us celebrate the festival, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of evil and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. So unleavened bread here represents sincerity and truth. Then in 1 Corinthians 5:7, therefore, cleanse out the old leaven, so that you are a new lump, as you are unleavened. For also Messiah, our Passover, was slaughtered for us. So here it relates leaven to being new, so that you are a new lump, as you are unleavened. The people of Israel were told not to add leaven to their bread. Without leaven, bread is a bit dense. And of course, it doesn't have the air bubbles. It doesn't rise. It becomes a flat bread. And generally, it's denser than bread with air bubbles in it. It's not fluffy. The old serpent and his messengers have lightened the density of the word and made it fluffy by adding leaven. And Yahuah's word is not meant to be fluffy. In other words, using craftiness and subtlety, changing the word of Elohim to something more acceptable to those with itching ears. What does that mean? So 2 Timothy 4:3 says, "For there shall be a time when they shall not bear sound teaching, but according to their own desire, they shall heap up for themselves teachers tingling the ear." The Bible lexicon defines Strong's G 2833 for tickling or itching as desirous of hearing something pleasant. That's exactly what is being preached from pulpits today. Something pleasant, which is the social gospel. Leaven, also known as the traditions of men, has softened the word of Elohim. Mark 7:13 says, "Nullifying the word of Elohim through your tradition, which you have handed down." And many such traditions you do. Adding leaven to bread during the feast of unleavened bread was a way of showing disrespect for the law and the command. It was as if the people were saying, the law doesn't matter to us. We're going to do what we want. That statement is what I see happening in the world today. By contrast, obeying the law and the commands was a sign of respect and reverence. It showed that the people of Israel took the law seriously, took the commands seriously, and were willing to follow even when it was inconvenient. I say the people of Israel because that is who the commands of Elohim are directed. Sojourners and strangers, whom we call Gentiles, those who were not Hebrew Israelites, they were included also if they accepted the commands and followed the command, if they were grafted in. But understand, these commands were given to Yah's chosen people. Leaven changes the word by adding to it, like bread with leavening. This leaven that Yahusha warns against is a counterfeit of his word. The design of leaven is to destroy people spiritually via false teaching. The word of Yahuah is perfect and does not need changing. Hypocrites change the word by adding leaven. Have you accepted a word filled with leaven? When we accept his truth, he gives us life. Romans 12:2 says, "And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you prove what is that good and well-pleasing and perfect desire of Elohim." We must renew our minds by proving all things. 1 Thessalonians 5:21. Prove them all. Hold fast what is good. Stop accepting the deceit of the social gospel, which I mentioned earlier, as well as the ineffable name doctrine and churchianity. What? You haven't heard those terms before? Well, I will cover these in detail in this series. And understanding these terms can change the trajectory of your spirituality if you are willing to listen to truth. As Daniel prophesied, knowledge is increasing. There are no more excuses. As we learn more, it becomes even clearer why Yahusha, Messiah, said what he said in Matthew 7:23. "And then I shall declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who work lawlessly." We must hear clearly and understand that we may be walking in error. Mark 7:16 says, "If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear." Mark 7:21 says, "For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil reasoning, adultery, whorings, murders, thefts, greedy desires, wickedness, deceit, indecency, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these wicked matters come from within and defile a man." As I share each teaching in this series, do your own research to make sure within your spirit that you will not hear those dreadful words, "I never knew you." Leaven added to the word is real. If it were not, there would not be warnings against it. So make sure that your spiritual walk is pure. Don't fall victim to the old serpent and his deceitful lies. As we continue this series, you may hear some truths that will make you angry, or those truths may help you understand maybe some questions that you've had, or simply answer some questions that you may have had. Personally, I find it exciting to learn these truths and to be on the same page as Elohim. But I understand not everyone will find it exciting because it goes against traditions that they have learned and have been part of most of their life. Changing a lifetime of teaching, changing a lifetime of learning, changing a lifetime of doing certain things spiritually, religiously, is difficult. But all Yahuah, our Elohim, desires of us is to be obedient to his word, to be faithful to him.